Hey guys, welcome back. So it's not quite time for seed starting where we live. It's still too cold, but I've been using the past few weeks to conduct a big experiment regarding how I can heat this mini greenhouse with or without any energy, or with or without any power, I should say. Most of these techniques are things that I learned from other YouTube videos or in forums online, and I wanted to test them out for myself and see how effective they really are. There are so many things that are going to affect exactly how warm you're able to make a greenhouse or a mini greenhouse. So I'm going to talk about some of the factors that I was able to manipulate a little bit to create more heat overnight. The nice thing about a mini greenhouse is you can put it wherever you want, which oftentimes means putting it someplace where power is accessible, especially just a very small amount of power like what I'm going to talk about. So before we get too much into it, this is geared mostly towards people using mini greenhouses, but the same principles can be applied on a bigger scale. There are two reasons why I chose this greenhouse, which is more long and low to the ground, instead of a tall vertical mini greenhouse with shelves. I feel like it just does a better job of dispersing the sunlight. I think the seedlings, I don't want them stacked on top of each other and competing for sunlight. So that's the other reason I like this longer setup. Those tall ones are notorious for blowing over. Now I will say this one will definitely, we get quite a bit of wind out here. This one will definitely blow away. We have it staked down with little stakes. I will link something similar for you too, but I just feel a little, I guess, less nervous about having to stake something down that's really tall and is gonna catch the wind more than something that is lower to the ground. I just think it helps in that arena. That being said, if you already have one of those vertical greenhouses, that's totally fine. Don't feel like you have to go out and buy a new one. Layer number 2 of no power heat is I placed it on what we have here is pea gravel around our house. Now it's a little bit debated whether pea gravel is better than just the soil or the grass. And the reason is because, well, I'll rewind a little bit. So the reason I wanted it on the pea gravel is because the stones are a very dense material. And the best thing would be more like concrete. Like if I could put this thing on straight concrete, what would happen is when the sun is out like it is right now, the sun would heat up the concrete during the day. And then during the night, that concrete would slowly release the heat to the plants. Now I wanted to use pea gravel to kind of try and harness that, it's called thermal mass. I wanted to use the pea gravel to try and get that same effect, but I had also read online that because pea gravel has so many pockets of air in between each stone, that maybe it wouldn't be as effective as just putting it on the ground. Well, fortunately, I did a couple of nights experiment. I tested it staked to the ground and I tested it on the pea gravel, and I'm happy to report that the pea gravel was much warmer by about 5 degrees, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're just growing plants and you're trying to avoid a frost, 5 degrees for no power makes a pretty big difference. Now, the unfortunate thing about thermal mass is if you want it to be really effective, you're gonna need sun. And today that's not really a problem. We have beautiful sun. However, unfortunately for most of the winter and really quite a bit of the spring, we don't have sun. So utilizing the thermal mass is gonna be most effective with the sun, but on days where everything is overcast, it might not be quite as effective. Now, fortunately, I tested out on the regular grass versus on the pea gravel on overcast days. So I still found the pea gravel was quite a bit warmer. So far we have 2 layers of ways to provide heat that require 0 power whatsoever. That is just a layer of plastic, and we have thermal mass in the pea gravel. The other thing you can do is add extra insulation. The way that we did this was with moving blankets. So what I did is I added moving blankets on top of the greenhouse, and I found that that definitely helped insulate the heat as well. I imagine the more that you put on, the more it would help with insulation. The downside being you gotta go out and take it off in the morning too. So it's really all about how much work are you willing to take on. So just to recap, we have thermal mass with the pea gravel, we have the moving blankets for insulation. You can use whatever insulation that you can think of. Now this is a really popular method I've heard a lot of people talk about, and as you can see, what I have in here is, I don't know if you can see, but I have 2 5-gallon buckets of water. So that's another way to add more thermal mass, especially in big greenhouses. Sometimes people will line the whole back wall. Basically, they'll pack a bunch of water into a greenhouse, and the idea is that the sun will heat up the water during the day and the water will slowly release that heat during the night. This is a great idea. Again, if you have sun. So the reason I'm not counting this as an effective way of heating a mini greenhouse in my experience was because when I tested that out, unfortunately we didn't have any luck. We did find that the sun heated up the water and helped a little bit early on in the night, but by the early morning or the end of the night, we actually found that there was no difference between when the buckets were in with the pea gravel and with the plastic and everything, and when there were no buckets. So especially considering the fact that if it were overcast all day, that water would be really cold. We'd be going into the night with buckets emitting basically cold instead of heat. I didn't personally find that it was a very effective way to heat the greenhouse. Now, if you live somewhere like especially high desert or where you can pretty much reliably count on sun every day, it might be worth trying to pack that greenhouse with water in one way or another and allowing the sun to heat it up. It might be that it didn't help because I just had 2 buckets in there. Maybe it needs to take up a lot more of the space in there, but those were just my findings. I was a little bit disappointed to have to report that. Now again, the really good news about having a mini greenhouse is you can put it somewhere close to where you have power. Now I got this idea from a different channel. I'll put that info down below, but what this guy did is he took small aquarium heaters and he put them inside a bucket of water. I believe in his situation, the bucket of water was very large compared to the greenhouse, so it's probably taking up a lot more space relatively than mine is. So maybe that's why he had a higher difference in degrees, where his inside of the greenhouse was way warmer than the outside. Now I always advocate to follow manufacturer instructions. I'm not positive, even though I've read about this method on various different forums, who knows, maybe different aquarium heaters are different. Definitely follow instructions for whatever heater you get. But I wanted to try his method and I put these aquarium heaters in these buckets and I found it to be quite effective. But when I had the plastic covering, the pea gravel for thermal mass, I covered it with moving blankets as extra insulation at night, and I had these aquarium heaters. What I found then was I was able to keep it very consistently approximately 15 degrees higher than the outside, and that's even when it was down in the low 20s the other night. Now I think it was around 22 the other night, and I was able to keep it, I think it was the upper 30s on the inside of the greenhouse with this setup. And that's really not too bad, especially for February. I mean, it did the job of keeping the frost away even in low 20-degree weather. Now the reason I'm doing the heated water instead of just a heater is, number one, heaters make me a little bit anxious. I don't like, especially like air blowing heaters, and just anything that is more fire prone. I'm not here to offer fire safety advice by any stretch, but I know personally I'm just not comfortable with those things running when I'm not there to observe them, especially if the instructions say that they need to be observed at all times too. Radiant heaters I'm a little more comfortable with. You guys know we use those for our chickens. Something I haven't tried with this system that I'm considering adding, like maybe 1 or 2 seedling heat mats, and I would probably just put those under the really cold sensitive plants like tomatoes and peppers when the time comes to start them. I'm gonna link everything I'm talking about, but I'll link some of those. Even though I haven't used them yet, I know that those would add a significant amount of heat. The nice thing about that too is it would be localized specifically to the plants that need it, rather than heating up the whole greenhouse with things like broccoli starts and brassicas that really don't mind the colder weather. That way I could definitely keep some warmer spots for the warmer plants and not waste any energy. Now you might be wondering about cost. Obviously, as soon as we talk about adding heat that takes electricity or any kind of energy, we have to consider cost. The good news is that these aquarium heaters use a very small amount of energy. We would maybe be running them 12 hours a day, and on top of that, we would only be doing it on the coldest nights. The further into the spring and the summer that we get, obviously the fewer nights we'd be needing to run it. So I can't imagine we'd be spending more than between $5 and $10 for an entire year's worth of heating this greenhouse for all of our seedlings. And if you think about it, if you guys have been to nurseries or box stores recently, that's like the cost of a pepper plant or 2. And I can make hundreds of plants for that amount of money this way. One last thing I'll add, if you want to try adding even more heat, is a lot of people will put 2 layers of plastic. So this plastic that these mini greenhouses come with, it's really not the thickest plastic. It's not the greatest stuff. So if you want, you can add more plastic on top, but what would be even more efficient is to add a layer of plastic over the seedlings themselves on the inside. I haven't yet tested that out because I don't have any seedlings, but especially a thick layer of sheet plastic Supposedly I've heard each layer of plastic adds about 6 degrees. So let me add a caveat, is that everything I've read has turned out when I've been testing it out myself. It's not quite as extreme as what I've been reading online. So I would say maybe a degree or 2 or maybe 3 degrees might be safe to count on with each layer of plastic, but definitely worth looking into if you say have this kind of setup that's working great and then you get a freak really cold night and you have all your seedlings. It's nice to be able to add some extra plastic if you need to. Of course, the other nice thing about having a very small, manageable amount of seedlings is, worst case scenario, you can always bring them inside for a night or 2 if you really get caught off guard. So I hope these measurements and layers and methods help somebody out there. Maybe you can pick and choose which ones work for you. Again, follow manufacturer instructions, be safe with everything, and definitely stake these things down if you have them. You don't want them blowing over and blowing all your seedlings over. That has happened with the stand-up ones to us in the past, and it's not fun. But really, all things considered, I love these mini greenhouses. I'm actually apprehensive to move to a giant greenhouse because I don't know, I don't feel like I need it. I think these are so nice to be able to move. They're so much cheaper to heat, because you don't have all this air space that you're heating that your plants aren't even using. So I really like these. I know people get frustrated that they rip, and that's part of having an affordable product, in my opinion. When they break, a little pack and tape goes a long way. If you guys have any mini greenhouse experience or ways that you like to heat your mini greenhouses or regular greenhouses, especially with energy consciousness in mind, please leave a comment below, or whatever seed starting setup that you like to use, even if it's indoor with grow lights. I love to hear about those too. Thanks for watching today, and we'll see you next time.